So I'm Professor Bukola Salami. I am Professor and Tier 1 Canada Research Chair in Black and Racialized People's Health at the Cummings School of Medicine, University of Calgary. As has been said, acknowledging the land, I am located in the heart of Southern Alberta, and I acknowledge and pay tribute the traditional territory of the Treaty 7 people, which include the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney. I am mindful of broken covenants, and I strive to make it right with the land and with each other. And I think many of you are located in Treaty 6 territory, which is the homeland of Métis Region 4. And this land also belongs to Indigenous people from the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, Inuit, and Métis. And their cultures continue to enrich our vibrant community. I would like to also acknowledge my funders, including MSI Foundation, Policy Wise for Children and Families, Canadian Institute of Health Research, Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, Canada Research Chair, and Public Health Agency of Canada. And I'll be drawing on different research that has been supported by some of these funders in the past. And also thank the participants and the communities that I've been able to work with over the last around 11 years in the province of Alberta. And without them, this would not have been possible, as well as co-investigators and research personnel who continue to contribute immensely to our research project. So the objectives of this presentation is to describe key features of community-based participatory research, to identify issues and challenges that may arise in community-based participatory research with Black immigrants and racialized communities, to describe strategies to achieving success in community-based participatory research, as well as key equity consideration with immigrant, Black, and racialized communities, and to discuss strategies for navigating ethical tensions and dilemmas. Now, many of what I will discuss today, my apologies, is much more focused on Black than racialized, but we can always discuss its applicability to racialized populations. So my Canada Research Chair, I am Tier 1 Canada Research Chair in Black and Racialized People's Health. And the purpose of my Canada Research Chair is to conduct original research, co-develop action, build capacity, mobilize knowledge, and establish networks as it relates to addressing racism and also addressing the well-being of Black and racialized people in Canada. So what is community-based research? Community-based research is a power-equalizing, collaborative research approach that sees community members as partners in the research process and experts on the issues of concern in their lives. Now, actually, there are different terminologies. There's community-based research, which is research that is done and embedded within community. There's community-based participatory research where you're focusing on engaging communities and equally sharing power with communities. And then you can also have community-based participatory action research, which is not just about power equalizing, power sharing, but also a commitment to transforming actions within the community. The methodology of community-based participatory research is based on principles of shared leadership, collaborative decision-making, and researcher community trust building with the aim of creating sustainable action-oriented research. And local knowledge and perspective are not only acknowledged, but form the basis of research, and practitioners take an explicit political stance. So as a community-based participatory researcher, you're often coming from a social justice lens and a commitment to addressing issues of power inequities. So community-based participatory research reflects questioning about the nature of knowledge and the extent to which knowledge can represent the interest of the powerful and serve to reinforce their position. It affirms that experiences can be a basis for knowing, and that experiential learning can lead to some legitimate form of knowledge that influences practice. There's also attention to power relation, and there's attention to reflexivity, flexibility, and an iterative approach. So the purpose of community-based participatory research is to understand and improve the world by changing it. It's to co-creation of knowledge that is used for the community by co-researchers. And it also involves the development of a sense of community. It also seeks to educate each other by negotiating meaning, as well as to raise consciousness and to mobilize to change, generate, or evaluate practices or policies. So I will talk about epistemic disobedience, independent thought, and free decolonial freedom. I like this quote. So I like this quote about epistemic disobedience, independent thought, and decolonial freedom. And the quote really challenges and advocates for a decolonial approach to working with communities that goes beyond the disciplinary focus or disciplinary acknowledgement to centering the needs and the priorities of communities. And I think, the beginning stands in terms of when you're having a decolonial approach to your research, is really thinking about who benefits from the research we do and at what cost is it to communities for the research we do. So Mignolo said, well, you get the idea of the interrelations between the politics of identity and epistemology. You could certainly be a Maori and an anthropologist, and by being an anthropologist, suppress the fact that you are Maori or Black Caribbean or Maori, for example. Or you can choose the colonial option. Engage in knowledge making to advance the cause of the Maori people rather than to advance the discipline. Why would someone be interested in advancing the discipline if not for their own alienation or self-interest? And I think oftentimes we need to think about the research that we are doing. Who benefits and what are we advancing? Are we advancing the needs of our communities, or are we advancing just academic pursuits? And also another quote I like is about epistemic violence. That is, violence exacted against or through knowledge is probably one of the key elements in many processes of domination. It's not through the construction of exploitative economic links or the control of political military apparatuses that domination is accomplished. And I think we need to think about the process of creating knowledge and some of the violence that occurs in that process of knowledge creation. And that violence historically has also extended to very extreme unethical research that has been done with Black communities. Here I provide 3 examples, and these are not the only examples. In fact, the 1990s, we had a case of Pfizer doing some unethical experiment in the 1990s in Africa. So here I present the case of the Tuskegee syphilis study, which was a study that was done to monitor the course of syphilis among Black men. The only thing is that the men did not know what they were being tested for. They did not know, and they did not know they had syphilis. And even when the researchers knew that this men had syphilis, and the men were dying from syphilis, and also their wives were also contracting syphilis, and their children were born with complications, the study still continued, and many men suffered the consequences. We also have Henrietta Lacks, a woman who had cervical cancer and whose cell was rapidly dividing, and her cell were harvested without her consent or without her knowing. And the cells were used for research for a long period of time, even though a family were living in abject poverty, and the pharmaceutical industry and the biomedical industry were making a lot of money from this woman. Her family were living in poverty, and her family were never compensated until I believe last year. There's also Sims, who we say is the father of modern day gynecology. So a lot of gynecologists, a lot of women will probably know about Sims position and different equipment that is used in gynecology today that are by Sims. He perfected his techniques on enslaved Black women without anesthesia, even though there was anesthesia available that were given to white women, and also without their consent. We also have in Canada, Canada's history of immigration policy that extends not just in terms of research, but also extends broadly. And we had a policy that deterred Black people from coming to Canada and also deterred racialized people from coming to Canada. So the policy stated in 1910 and existed from 1910 to 1967 that the governor in council may by proclamation or when it deemed it fit or necessary, prohibit for a stated period or permanently the landing in Canada or the landing at any point of entry in Canada of immigrants belonging to any race deemed unsuitable to the climate or requirement of Canada. And this was to deter immigrants from being able to come to Canada, especially Black immigrants. And in case Black immigrants did not fully understand that we do not want you here, it was specifically stated and proposed in Parliament that the Negro race is deemed unsuitable to the climate and requirement of Canada. Now, the later one in 1911 did not exist, but the one of 1910 broadly covered even what 1911 policy statement was about, and that prevention of immigrants to come to Canada was in place from 1910 to 1967. Some immigrants were still able to come to Canada, so we know that there were Chinese immigrants, Indian immigrants, even Black immigrants came to Canada before then, but some of them were turned back based on this policy. And a lot of these inequities that we faced has contributed to issues of distrust. I have done research in the past looking at COVID-19, information and disinformation among Black people. And during the research, some people still talked about there's a lot of broken trust between ACB communities and the mainstream medical healthcare because of the medical history between ACB communities and the healthcare system. We could talk about the Tuskegee experiment and similarly to look at other Black experiences in healthcare that we see. So many of these experiences are not just stuck in the den, it's also affecting us, and it affected us during the days of COVID-19. These issues of trust has implications for health outcomes. So we know that flu vaccination is much lower in Black communities. And there I show you a picture of flu vaccination. It's lower in Black communities, and it also tends to be lower, the lower a person's age, generally. And one of the main reasons of this, of course, is again, distrust of Black communities. And one of the contributors to distrust in Black communities is historical issues of injustices. So this continues to affect us. And in light of many of these inequities that exist in the communities, the United Nations Working Group of Experts was here in 2007, and they concluded that Canada's history of multiculturalism, despite Canada's reputation of multiculturalism and diversity, and the positive measures taken to address racial discrimination, the working group is concerned about the human rights situation of African Canadian, Canada's history of enslavement, racial segregation, and marginalization has had deleterious impact on people of African descent, which must be addressed in partnership with affected communities. Across the country, many people of African descent continue to live in poverty and poor health, have low educational attainment, and are overrepresented in the justice system. But I want to highlight the tool that they said is very important in addressing some of this, is that all these inequities must be addressed not by researchers alone, but through our partnership with communities. And we have, within the last 10 years, the AGAP principles was created, which is the engagement, governance, access, and protection principle, which was created by community partners, researchers, and diverse stakeholders to create a framework for data governance framework for data collected from Black communities in Ontario. There are 4 principles of the IGA framework, and this includes engagement. So there is a need with Black communities for genuine, cyclical, accessible consultation with communities regarding data collection, management, analysis, and use. There's also a need for governance and community decision-making about engagement processes and data collection, management, analysis, and use. And this is achieved through the establishment of community governance tables. And there's a need for access, and communities, it's unethical for communities, for research to be conducted with communities without them having access to that data. So the communities have the right to access their collective data and to determine who else can access it, along with the capacity building required to enable this right. There's a need for protection, the safeguarding of all individual rights and types of data, including identifiable, de-identified, and anonymized data. So many of these principles you may see go in line with OCA principles, and these principles are really the main ethical principles that guides research with Black communities. The need for us to ensure that we are protecting Black communities. Not all data is good data collection, and not all research is good for our communities, and ensuring that the community needs is centered rather than any other interest. We did a research project looking at ethically, culturally appropriate research with Black communities, and we interviewed several members. We interviewed researchers, and we did a scoping review of researchers that have done scoping review of studies that have been conducted in Black communities in the prairies. 24 studies were included, and we also did interviews with 12 researchers. And from our scoping review, we started with 800 articles, and we ended with 26 articles. And some of the things that we found in our scoping review, in terms of culturally appropriate ways to research with Black communities, includes the importance of research collaboration, the importance of community members, having community members on research team, the importance of outreach into community hubs, and also being ethical in terms of our compensation or honorariums that are provided to communities to compensate them for their time, and also attending to issues related to gender differences, gender inequalities, and also the importance of attention to issues related, for example, age, because of the strong perspective on respect within our communities. And the importance of discussing and the care that needs to be taken when discussing sensitive topics and fears, such as when discussing HIV, mental health, and also the challenges with language and interpretation. So some of the key considerations that we found in our review was the need for creating formal partnership and actively involving Black community members as co-researchers, advisory committee members, research assistants, translators, and interpretation. The importance of matching female interviewers with female participants and male interviewers with male participants, or all male or all female sets in the context of focus group. The intentional inclusion of Black Canadian community members as members of research team, as co-researchers, research assistants, and research coordinators. And the need to recruit through gatekeepers, community hub, ethnic organization, local services, local businesses, community leaders, and religious leaders. Also, there's a need to ensure that research projects involving Black communities are either Black-led or at least have critical Black representation. And we must also co-design data collection protocols and methods with Black community collaborators in research projects involving sensitive topics. And when researching subjects involving taboo or sensitive, framing questions that invite participants to share their knowledge of experiences of others within their community will be an additional mechanism for obtaining information. So I remember when we first did our research on mental health of Black people, the first community leaders we interviewed, we asked about mental health. And the community leaders, informed us that it's best for us to frame it not as mental health, but in culturally appropriate ways. So name the symptoms. And even after we name the symptoms, as opposed to talking about mental health, we can ask, have you had emotional difficulties or stressors that were beyond your control? But even beyond that, we can also ask, do you know anyone in the community that has experienced this broadly? And people may be more likely to discuss. We also did interviews with 12 researchers that have conducted research with Black communities. And many of the research talk about the unethical practices of people that come to the community, fly-by-night scholars or helicopter researchers, they call them, come to the community without engaging members of the community, take data, run away with data, and the data is never useful to the community. Again, the EGAP principles of access and engagement of communities is very, very important here. And also ensuring the community have a role in research. So when you're doing a survey, for example, you can work in partnership with the community to create the survey and ensuring that you're not going an expert, but acknowledging the expertise that communities have. So in terms of recruitment too, one of the strategies is, when you're recruiting, is to engage community leaders or gatekeepers in terms of helping you to get into the community. I think involving and hiring not just Black students, but Black community members for projects is very, very important. And also ensuring that you make yourself visible to the community, for example, by engaging, by going to events, so that community get to build trust. Again, remember that trust has been broken in the past, and it's important that we work on building trust with communities. You can also engage communities in data analysis, and this must be done with care. Noting that some communities are very, very small communities. So when we engage them, I have a research project that I did in the past where I engage communities in research process and data analysis, but I still ensured a high level of confidentiality. So including by having members sign confidentiality agreements, by ensuring that we had 6 community researchers, youth researchers, and by ensuring each youth only have access to their file, by anonymizing the data before participants get the information. And those are some of the ways, or limiting how many people in the community have access. Now, when we think about a decolonial approach, an ethical approach to the community, the need for access, the need for protection, the need for engagement, the need for governance, this cannot be possible without mobilizing knowledge to communities. We have many researchers that come to communities, either Black or racialized communities. They get their data and you never see them again. They never present their data back to communities. All they care about is that publication, that impact factor, that H index, that I-10 index. And this is very unethical. We must mobilize our research back to communities, and we must ensure that we support communities to ensure the research that we've collected is useful for communities. So some of the implications of what I've talked about include Black Canadian inclusion in research team, recruitment through community gatekeepers and informal and innovative strategies, community involvement in data analysis, setting the agenda, and researchers should consider intersectional identities within the Black community. So we don't have one, Black community. We have several communities within communities. And sometimes, you need to vary to what communities want, rather than a broad stroke approach. Understand that community act as gatekeepers to protect participants and frame issues as community issues and consider cultural sensitivity. Ensure you mobilize knowledge innovatively, and challenges to research with Black communities includes long-standing mistrust, addressing diversity among and within communities, language barriers, so ensure that communities actually understand what you're talking about, ensure that they understand the process, that they fully understand. I remember doing some research with Black communities in the past, and how do you ensure that people will actually understand? Yes, using interpreters. I've also in the past used oral consent in languages of choice so that then people are able to fully understand. And also ensuring that the grade reading level of those consent forms are below a grade 6 or even sometimes a grade 3 level. And respect and reciprocal relationship and recognition of prolonged community engagement in funding models and equitable incentives for participation. So I'll provide 2 case examples of research that I have done with Black communities. This research was done in 2017, 2016, 2017, with Africa Center, a Black organization in Canada. And it was my first research with Black communities looking at parenting and mental health promotion practice of African immigrants. I've also done some work looking at doctoral research with living caregivers. And my initial research in Edmonton was with temporary foreign workers. I've also been a volunteer as a board with Africa Center. That was some years ago. And some of the information I would draw here also is from listening to the needs of community and my critical ethnographic research in communities. So usually I often have advisory committee members, and they're usually community leaders. And the importance of that is that it's people that know not just about one individual case, but know broadly about what is happening in the community. And also, there's also a need to ensure adequate cultural reappropriate naming of Black people, and also a need for to address issues related to compensation of people's time, including compensation for transportation. So for this first research, I interviewed 14 community leaders, interviewed 32 African immigrant parents, who many of them I recruited from grocery stores, service providers, community liaisons, community leaders, and immigrant service provider, and also from my network, and interviews of 12 service providers and policymakers. We were able to gather rich data sources, including this data that talks about issues related to mental health. So when I go into a home and I ask about, has your child experienced mental health problem? People usually are like, no one has any challenges here. When then I ask, has your child experienced behavioral, emotional difficulties that were beyond your control as parents? People were more likely to talk. But even then, some people still do not like to talk. But then when I frame it as, do you know anyone in the community? And it's when I frame, do you know anyone in the community, that this rich information came out about children being sent back to their country of origin because, of course, people are not comfortable with Western medicine. And some of the benefits of community-based participatory research, engagement, beneficial reciprocity with community is even, it helps in terms of more efficiency in data collection. And some of the impact we have is a stakeholder engagement day where we had 150 stakeholders. We had a community report that was published before we had any presentation. And the research was also very lucky to presented to the Prime Minister of Canada, which changed policy with Black people in Canada. So some of the lessons learned is the importance of having multiple community workers. So the way, if you want to diversify your sample, and if you want your sample to be representative of communities, is to diversify who is who is recruiting from you, because different people, for example, if you come to me, help me recruit, I'll probably help you recruit more Black people. If you want, for example, to have a diverse sample that is just on general population, Black, racialized, everyone, then make sure you have some Black, make sure you have some Indigenous people, make sure you have some racialized people of different backgrounds in it. And if, for example, you want a research project that is on Black people, and you say, you want a research that is on Black people, make sure you have Black people from different countries of origin, and including historical Black peoples of Canada. And also engagement in a strategic location, including grocery store and sports events. So some of the lessons learned includes the importance of addressing to literacy. So in our communities, there are some people that do not have sufficient literacy skills, even to be able to read and write in their own language or in English language. And some of the lessons I learned is sometimes, it happened to me twice, that I will go into a home, and thank God I had in my pocket a tool to be able to do oral consent with the interviews. But I will go into the home, and the families will tell me they don't have their glasses with them. At first, when it happened, I'm like, oh, you don't have your glasses, you're located inside the same house, you can go and get it. But then I got to realize that it's a way for people to communicate that basically I cannot read this for any reason, I cannot read this, so I need you to be able to guide me through this. Attending also to prayer times, and this is not just with Black, it is with Middle Eastern communities, it is with general Muslim communities. So I would go into a home, and sometimes I need to take a break so that people are able to pray. Ensuring that the foods that we provide are culturally appropriate. So ensuring, for example, that we have the kosher meals for Jewish community, we have the halal meals for many Muslim communities. And for some communities too, you need to have vegetarian options. And also attending to issues of gender, gender inequalities, gender balance in the research. I also learned about ethically important moments in research. And there are sometimes in research projects, issues related to ethics. Sometimes consent is not just a process of, someone comes, they sign document and that's it, voila, let's go. Okay. Consent has to be negotiated throughout the research process. And it is both with participants' verbal cues and also non-verbal cues related to the research. So a way in terms of my doctoral work was on Filipino living caregivers. And one of the things that I learned there is what happens when participants start crying in the research. Do you continue on with the research and ignore? Do you say, let's take a break? Or do you stop the research? What I've learned from my research is it's important to, usually what I tell is, let the participant know that I'm going to stop it. And oftentimes participant will tell you no. They don't want to stop the interview, they want to continue because it's therapeutic for them. I remember when I did my doctoral work with Filipino migrants, and many of them will tell me, there was a woman that had experienced abuse at the hands of an employer. And she was sent out of the house in February on a cold night, out of the house, and she became homeless. And, when she started talking to me, I asked her, she told me all the stories that she had endured. She did not cry. And at the end, I asked her, so why did you do this? Why did you migrate to, how come you migrated from Sudan, from Saudi Arabia as a registered nurse, and you came to work as in Canada as a living caregiver cleaning homes? And she started crying. And she said, I did this for my family. I did this so that my family, my kids can have a better life in Canada. And at some point in the interview, when she started crying, and she had brought someone to the interview that was there to support her. And that person also started crying. And I'm like, I will turn this off. And she's like, no, please don't, because I've never had time to actually talk about this and grieve. So for many cases, though, you probably have to stop the interview. But there are a few cases where participants may tell you, I want to actually continue on with this interview. What I've also seen is participants take a break, they recuperate, and they come back. What I've also seen in interviews too, I often allow my participants and I tell them, there are times too that participant will talk and say, oh, I don't want that, what I said to be recorded. So sometimes, there was a time that I was having a meeting with a participant interview, and the participant is like, oh, I want to say something, but I don't want it to be recorded. So we shut off the audio recorder, we talk about what we really want to say, and then we turn it back on and continue. So again, participant consent and negotiating consent throughout the research project. And issues related to confidentiality, especially with small communities, when you're working with small communities. And I've heard sometimes that some people sometimes prefer for the interviewer to be from the community, and sometimes they prefer for the interviewer to be outside. What I always do is for all people that work on my team, for them to sign a confidentiality agreement that really ensures that they understand that whatever is the information they collect is confidential. And also the importance of considering stigma and also sensitive topics, okay, is very important. So there are some topics that are very, very sensitive within our communities, and being taken care in terms of how we consider that. So some of the lessons learned is ensuring community first in terms of publication. So I remember when I did this study on parenting, part of the participant that I interviewed were 11 women from 11 women that were from Somalia. So I had an undergraduate student, and the undergraduate student wanted to do the undergraduate work on Somalian, analyzing the Somalian data. And, the student was smart, very, very, excellent student, smart student. And she was like the most fastest and most efficient student I have known. And she wrote up the results, and we were about to submit it. But then I told her, but we've not shared this with the community yet. And we had to wait and say, before we can submit and submit in academic journals, the first thing that is important first is to ensure that the community knows about the findings and the community benefits. So she had to wait for about 6 months for us to write the report, share the report with the committee before now she can submit a paper for publication. And of course, the also importance of considering inequities that people face. So for example, if you're doing research with parents, you need to ensure that there's childcare there. If not, you're telling them that, if you're a parent and you don't have money for a nanny, then that means you can't attend. Parking, and also acknowledging participants. So in the community engagement day, people that we organized, people told us, oh, they wanted a certificate of attendance too, or a letter of attendance, so that they can show it at work. And framing and naming issues in a way that it serves the needs of communities. I've also done some work on mental health of Black youth in Canada, where we interviewed Black youths who were part of the Year Come Up group affiliated with Africa Center. And at that time, this project started because I was a member of Africa Center, board member. And at that time, I got to learn as a board member that the youth had challenges being able to meet their needs. There was no funding for the youth. And I asked to meet with the youth leader. And then the youth leader helped me to meet with about 8 youths that were part of the Year Come Up group. And when I met with the youths, my question to them was, how can I be of help to you? How can I support you? And the youths told me they wanted to do a project on mental health. And they wanted me to also prioritize their needs, and they wanted to actually drive the research. So they wanted a participatory involvement. They informed me that they wanted an intersectionality perspective, that they also wanted reciprocal benefits in terms of that. And they wanted us to focus on their collective identity as African, Black, and Caribbean, rather than just saying African alone. So with the youths, we developed research questions that ensure that we fit research question with also the funding priorities. And we did interviews with 30 Black youths, and we did conversation cafes with 99 youths. And we focused on mental health promotion. And the conversation cafe, it was after the 30 interviews that we did the conversation cafe, and we engaged youths to set up and discuss with us, identify conversation cafe topics. So the youth on the advisory committee, who were also the ones that did the interviews, because they said, we want you to train us, we want us to do the interviews. So part of this is also building their capacity. So we built their capacity, they interviewed, and based on that, they selected the conversation cafes they want. And the conversation cafes they wanted was, they said in September, youths are just coming back, and we want to equip them. We want to set them on the right path. Let's do mental health promotion first. And then from our data, they said, say some youths, for example, non-binary youths, we wanted to discuss our intersectionalities as youths. And then they also discussed intergenerational relationships. How do we address intergenerational relationships? And then the last, they took youth to thinking and dreaming about what an ideal mental health clinic will look like in the province of Alberta for Black youth. So we are 10 advisory committee members, and of this, 7 of them worked as research assistants. They were paid for their work as research assistants, and we gave equivalent payment to advisory committee members and research assistants. So advisory committee members were paid an honorarium based on how many hours they worked as advisory committee, and research assistants were officially hired as research assistants, and we had frequent meetings. And the role of research assistant in the advisory committee was to facilitate participant recruitment, interview participants, organize, and they led conversation cafe. In fact, they led the knowledge mobilization session. The final day of advisory dissemination, I was basically a guest there to come and watch a presentation. They did everything else, and they were also co-authors on publication, and they've been also co-presenters on presentation. And many of the youths now that we engaged in are now either have completed their master's or their master's student. So this has also been helpful for the youth to lift them up and also to position the youth for success. We also training communities to be able to use data, to be able to access data, to be able to engage is important. So we provide them with 4-hour training, and they also completed ethics module, and they had close mentorship with 2 doctoral students. And they had 1 meeting with project lead before each conversation cafe. So I just wanted to show this. This is by the youths. We asked them to develop conversation cafe questions. And I think for me, if I was to develop conversation questions, I would say, tell me about your experience with your parents. What can be done? No, the youth did not go that route. They went to develop questions based on their lived experience. So because of their lived experience, they were able to develop in-depth questions that were very, very important in getting vital information from the youth and getting the youth to discuss and converse about critical issues that were important to them, such as, for example, what do you do if you want to attend university to study music or entrepreneurship, but your parents want you to, for example, go and become a doctor? Or what do you do if someone tells you that they wish they had lighter skin, and how do you respond as a parent? So some of the things that the youths themselves has experienced was infused into the conversation cafe, and that is the beauty of participant engagement in research, because participants do come with their own expertise, and that expertise is based on their own knowledge. So some of the success, we recruited more participants than we wished. We had initially targeted. We had a rich data. We were able to build capacity of youth, and it was a personally fulfilling experience for me and for many of the youths. Some of the challenges including attending to issues of power, because in our communities, there's issues related to age along power lines. I'm older, I am a professor. Many of them were still students. The way they negotiated this power was through the research assistants who, were, PhD students too, were through the PhD students. And sometimes too, they will have meetings within themselves to negotiate power before then they have meeting with me. Issues related to flexibility, issues related to time, but time also produces good work. Issues related to community priorities, ensuring that we prioritize communities. The limitations of funding really limits how much you can move funding around. And sometimes you have to go back to the funder. Issues related to confidentiality. What we did in this research with 7 Black youths collecting data is we created files for each of the youths. So each youth had access to their file. So let's say each youth recruited 5 participants, they had access to their file, but they did not have access to all the files. At the end, the youths also told us, we want to also analyze the data ourselves. So how do we do this? What we did is we trained 2 of the youths who then had access to all the files, and the 2 youths were the one that analyzed the data. And once they've analyzed and everything has been anonymized, we then brought it to all the youths to discuss collectively together. And the importance of diversifying our sample. So the advisory committee you have will affect who you're recruited. So for our project, many of our advisory committee members were female. So we were having too much of a representation of females rather than males in our sample. How we actually diversified was we went to Africa Center Soccer Tournament. And we went there and we recruited from there. And of course, in a soccer tournament, there's usually more males. We're able to diversify our sample. So rich data, the impact, we had rich data. We were able to build the capacity of youths. Youth were co-authorship and youth-led dissemination to communities. And this research was presented at that time to the then executive director of Africa Center, who collaborated with another organization to then create a mental health clinic for Black people in Western Canada, the first mental health clinic for Black people in Western Canada. So some of the lessons that we've learned is that we can create impact through community-based research with Black community, that we have to rethink what impact means. Impact is not just about publication. It's also about what you're doing and how your research, and ethics is about how your research is benefiting the community. The importance of advisory committee, the importance of engaging, the importance of prioritizing community needs over academic needs, and the importance of reciprocal relationships. So how are you giving back? So one of the ways that I give back, for example, is through mentorship, support of Black youths, intentionally building capacity, and attending to cultural nuances. I think that's about it with my presentation. And I'm sure there must have been questions while I was talking. I wasn't looking at the screen, so I would open it now to any questions.
There is a question in the chat that says that, what are some of the knowledge mobilization strategies you've used that attend to language barriers or lower literacy rates?
Thank you. So in terms of knowledge mobilization and lower literacy, one of the things is, honestly, like when people do research, doctoral students do research, they have a, what do you call this? They have a, they have a thesis. No one is gonna read the thesis, just a few people, your doctoral committee. So it's important that you actually give an oral presentation to the community, okay? So for example, I organized a stakeholder engagement day. If anyone does not ask challenges in terms of English, you can always, for example, have an interpreter that is right there and able to interpret to people, right? So our knowledge mobilization day, we added in English and French. And, I think there might have been one person in the audience that had someone sit beside them and interpret in another language. So that's a really way, like going oral is a way to respond to lower literacy rate. We've also in the past done videos to be able to attend to literacy rate. We have developed infographic with minimal words or plain words, but much more graphic, to be able to ensure that people with diverse literacy rates are able to actually engage in the research. So again, publication, how many, communities read, publication in peer-reviewed journals? That is, peer-reviewed journal, there's benefit of peer-reviewed journal, but it doesn't serve our communities. For many of this research, it is the presentation. And, if you're to ask me, how did I come to present to the Prime Minister about this research? It was because of an advisory committee member, someone that was on the advisory committee for the parenting project. And she was the one that mentioned my name, and I had the opportunity to go present. And this transformed policy in Canada. So sometimes, community leaders, they have networks that they're involved in, but they don't know in terms of how to amplify. My research in the past too was once published in a Filipino newspaper in the Philippines. It was published in a newspaper that was located in the Philippines about the experiences of temporary foreign workers here in Canada, published in a Filipino newspaper. And how did that happen? It was also someone that was on the advisory committee, that was well-connected. So community leaders, oftentimes they are well-connected, but they do not have the tools. And when you engage them, sometimes they're able to help you amplify your work to communities and help you translate and mobilize your work to communities.
Thank you. I hope it answers your question, Finn. Okay. Any question, you can use the raise hand feature, or you can also type it in the chat. There is a comment from Julianne saying, Bukola, you are giving such deep insight here, sharing about conversations around consent. Appreciate this share greatly. There is a comment that says, thanks so much for the info about research from Avril. Any question, feedback, questions, comments, anything? Okay, Avril, you can unmute and ask your question.
So it's basically a comment regarding the consent when research is done, and obviously consent is taken, and then the information that is received was not passed back to the communities. For example, Salami, you gave an example with the Canada, with the cervical cancer research.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. It kind of really bugs me when that happens, because if information is taken from that community and it could help that community, I think that the information should pass back to that community and, give the findings of your research, or anybody who's doing the research, I had a similar situation when I was in England. I had my baby in a hospital in England, and my bladder got nicked, as far as I'm concerned. And when we did research, we found out that mostly all the Black women who went to that hospital to do a cesarean section, their bladder got nicked.
Mm.
And that was very interesting, but apparently nobody really took it on to find out why it was happening.
Thank you. And I think, what you said reminded me of is not just about the cell lines that we harvested. It also reminded me of the Tuskegee syphilis study, where
yes,
people may have maybe they are doing a research and they realize that, something is going wrong, something is, not going well for a group of people, and they keep their mouth shut. And that is unethical. Not acting is unethical. It's not just about what you do, it's also what you don't do when you receive information. And I think, one unethical piece too that we must talk about too is when we see inequities within communities and we also decide not to do research about those inequities, not to uncover, or we do the research and then we come and we blame the community for those research. So there are so many ways in which inequities may show up in many of the things that we do.
Yeah. Well, it just brought me back to that. and I was like, this is something that has to be done. Something has to be done about it. And funny enough, you mentioned about the flu vaccination is lower in Black communities when it comes to the flu vaccines. Was the research being done on that? And and that was what was that was the findings of that?
I will tell you this, that this is the first time that research, I just got that data out of the Statistics Canada lab 3 days ago. So that is the first time that I'm actually going to be showing that research about flu vaccination. We do know that in the days of COVID-19, there's a research that has been done that showed that Black people were less likely to get the flu shot. We do know that Black people were the most likely to die of COVID-19 in 2020. And some of the things that contributed to it was because of inequities, people working, as, like, for example, people working as personal support workers as opposed to working as managers. More white people working as managers, less flu, more Black people providing direct care. And so the flu vaccine, I am not sure if there's been one that is, so this is one of our first research that will be done. And one of the things I will be looking at to follow with this is, we've also done a scoping review of the literature looking at flu vaccine hesitancy among, Black people in Canada. I may be able to find, among Black people in North America. So we know in North America that there's disparities, but now we are putting numbers to it in terms of flu vaccine. And the question is then, what do we now do about those inequities?
Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
There is another question in the chat that is asking that they would appreciate your thoughts on whether there are any ethical considerations we should consider before and during member check-in.
So first is, I need to say that there are different types of member check-in. There are different ones that I have seen. I have seen, for example, people do interviews and they provide the raw interview transcript back to the participant. So you're basically a participant and you're getting your interview data back. Now, when you do that, you need to consider, for example, on what platform are you providing it, right? So secure transmission of data to participants. And I've also seen people, which is what I tend to do, have preliminary data that they provide to participants. And that preliminary data often, would be almost the report that you want to publish, the report section of what you want to publish that then you provide to participants. In that way, you would have stripped out all identifying information. You would have changed the participant name to pseudonyms so that, participants don't, even, get to know another participant. So those are some of so how do you transmit the information when you provide? How do you anonymize if you're providing other data that is not just from a participant with member check-in? And then another ethical obligation is that, there's no point in you asking people. So another ethical obligation that we have is some people also collect data and they never publish it. They just collect and they don't publish. And that is not good because you're not appreciating the time that people have invested, community members have invested to the research. Or they publish data, they don't share it. They don't even share it with anyone, talk less of, where they're sharing it with. So when you do member check-in too, you need to also, how are you using the data? So you're not just, asking people. When people do tell you or make recommendations, it must be integrated into your final analysis.
Okay. Thank you everyone for coming. So before we close, I want to take a moment to extend a heartfelt thank you to Professor Bukola Salami for today's powerful and thought-provoking session. Professor Salami, your insights into the ethics of community-based research with Black communities have not only deepened our understanding today, but it's also challenged us to go back and reflect more critically on our own research practices. And I like the portion where you talk about your final question that you answered, where you spoke about we collect the data and we don't bring it out. We just leave it and it's not published or anything. Then it's like we've wasted people's time because we went to them to solicit for those information and they provided because they believe the cost of the research that we do. So they know it's going to contribute to knowledge as well. Then we just dump them in the shelf. So it is not fair when we do that. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing your time, your expertise, and also your lived experience with us so generously. It is much appreciated. We are grateful for your contribution to the Ethics in Practice series and also for helping us create a space for meaningful dialogue around care, accountability, and also equity in research. So everyone, please join me in giving Professor Salami a virtual round of applause or appreciation in the chat if you can. So thank you so much. Okay, have a great rest of the week, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.